Hey everyone, welcome back to Will Small Engines. In today's video, I'm going to go over how to get your snowblower ready for a snowstorm. And before we get into that, I'm going to tell you guys a few of the steps that I do. So the first one is make sure the engine runs. The second one is make sure the auger works. Third, make sure the drive works. Fourth, check all wear items like skid shoes, shear pins, that kind of thing. So let's get on to the video and let's go on to the first step, which is making sure that the engine runs. So here's today's victim. It's my 80s Craftsman snowblower. It's in pretty good shape for what it is. 5 horsepower Tecumseh engine, 23-inch cut. Perfect size for my small driveway. Anyway, let's make sure the engine runs now. So let's do that. I'll put you guys on the exhaust. So with any snowblower before a snowstorm, you're gonna want to make sure the engine runs and it runs well, because if your engine stops on you in the middle of a snowstorm and you can't start it back up, boy, you're gonna have a bad day. Trust me, I've had that before, and you don't want that to happen to you. So first thing, make sure it runs and it runs well. And to keep that engine running well, I like to use this Stabil fuel stabilizer product. I just add it to my gas, and whenever I buy fuel for my small engines, I like to buy the highest number. So let's say 94. You want to get that one because it gives the engine a hotter burn, and it's not going to have as much ethanol in it like the 87, 85. And you want less ethanol because the ethanol will gum up the fuel lines and carburetor. And if you can only get ethanol gas, add this or any sort of stabilizer product. It gives you directions, and I really like this product, so yeah. And you can't really go wrong because there's a bunch of different ones, but they all pretty much do the same thing. And they even sell marine ones, which I think are even better for winter because, it's snow and the snow can get in the gas sometimes. So you might even want to consider getting a marine stabilizer. So let's make sure the engine runs. All right, this is gonna be a cold start. I haven't started this in I think a few weeks. So let's see. Gas is on, choke is on, the throttle's pretty much full. 3, 4, 5. So usually I like to let it run for a bit, warm it up, and make sure it runs good and revs up all the way and down. So do that, and then you should be good. So I'm not sure if you heard what I could say just then, but basically it was I like to rev it up and down and let it warm up for a while to make sure that it's not going to stop on me during the middle of a good usage. So make sure it runs, and now we're going to check the oil because you're going to want to have good oil and good fuel, like I just mentioned, to make sure that your engine runs strong. So let's take the dipstick out and we'll just take a peek at it. And ideally, that's what your oil, it's not hot, that's what your oil should look like. Nice golden color like that. If it's a little brown, it's not that big of a deal, but if it's black, you're going to want to change that out pretty fast. So now we're going to move on to the next step, which is making sure that the augers work. So to make sure the augers work, basically start up the engine and hold the auger lever down and then watch them spin. There we go, the augers work great. And while we're on the topic of augers, we might as well talk about shear pins, which you should definitely check every time before you use your machine. So a shear pin is this little bullet right here, and it's basically designed to snap if you hit anything with the augers. And what I like to do every time before I use my machine, I like to take a look at it and make sure that it's not about to snap. So this one looks good, and you want your augers, and you want your augers to turn like this a little bit freely, because if you tighten these too much down, it'll just pinch the shaft and it'll like really seize it up, and then you can really break the gears in here, which you don't want to do because they're really expensive. So moral of the story is check the shear pins, and you have a couple of extras on hand. They're pretty cheap as well. They're like $5 for a pack of 4 on Amazon or something like that. So they're definitely worth having a few extras. And yeah, make sure your shear pins are good, and the gear in here is good too. You can just turn this, and you want this to turn like this and no more, and that's how you know the gear is good. Because if you can spin this freely and the shear pin still intact, that means the gear inside of here is stripped out, and you don't want to have to replace that because it's really expensive. So again, make sure your shear pins are good. And while we're on the topic of making sure things are good, make sure you check your belts. I just changed these, so I'm not going to show you guys because it's whatever. So yeah, make sure your belts are good, and if they're about to snap, make sure you have spares on hand, because if it snaps in the middle of a snowstorm and it's cold out, you're not going to want to change that belt. Trust me, it's going to be a pain. So make sure your belts are in good shape and they're not about to snap in half. Then, and the next thing, and one of the final things we're going to talk about, is the drive. And you're going to want to make sure your drive components are intact and functional. So now we're going to test that out. So there's one part that you're really going to want to make sure is intact, and that's going to be the friction wheel. I'll put a picture up on screen of what one looks like. You're going to want to make sure that's intact, because if it's not intact, the friction drive will actually slip and you're not going to get any traction. So basically how you test for that is you come over to the snowblower when it's running, and I'll explain it before I show you guys. So when it's running, you pull down the drive lever and you pull back on the snowblower, and if the wheels are still spinning on the ground while you're applying force backwards, that means your friction drive is intact. So I'll show you that and how that works. So as you hopefully just saw there, I was pulling back on the handles and the wheels were still spinning on the ground, which tells us that the friction wheel is in good shape. And you're also going to want to make sure that the tires are inflated to how you like them, and that the axles aren't, and that the wheels aren't rusted on the axles. And to prevent the wheels from rusting on the axles, I like to apply a bit of, I'll put a picture up on the screen. I like to apply a bit of anti-seize on the axle shaft and then spin the wheel on there. That just ensures that if you ever have to get the wheels off again, that they're not going to be rusted on there and it's not going to be a pain. So, and if you buy a new snowblower, do this right when you get in the machine, because the companies who build these things don't put the anti-seize on, so the wheels will literally rust on there in like 2 years. So when you get a new snowblower, make sure you add some sort of grease or anti-seize to the axle shaft to prevent the wheels from sticking. Do it, because you're going to regret not doing it. Trust me. Alright, so the final thing we're going to check is going to be the skid shoes and scraper bar to make sure they're not worn out and that they're set correctly. So this is a skid shoe. That is a scraper bar. And you're going to want to make sure that these are set correctly and there is a gap between the pavement here and the scraper bar. So on my machine, it's a little hard to tell because there's snow on the ground, but I like to have a 1/4 inch gap between the bar and the ground. This will allow some snow to remain on the surface, which is fine by me, and you don't want the bar rubbing directly on the ground or else it'll wear out, because as you can see here, the previous owner didn't do that and it's all messed up. So I think I caught it just in the nick of time and set it properly. And this is a skid shoe, a little closer up look here, and what you're looking for on a skid shoe is that this metal here on the bottom is intact and isn't worn through. If it's worn through, you're going to want to either replace the skid shoe or fix it. I'm going to show you guys ones that I fixed, which is much cheaper than buying new ones. Alrighty, so here are some skid shoes that I've fixed. So I actually had these on a machine. I had a machine before, and these were all worn out. So what I did was I got my angle grinder and I cut off the old junky metal. Then I welded on a piece of thick metal here. This will increase the life of your skid shoes. And hey, this repair was free. New metal skid shoes are $40 for a pair. I'd rather have free ones that are thicker than the ones you can buy, and you can also be a little confident and say, hey, I know I did that, I built that myself, which always feels good. So yeah, you can, just an example of how you can save some money and fix your own skid shoes. So there we go. Yeah. So now it's starting to snow pretty good, and we're gonna go test out the snowblower. So I'll see you guys when there's enough snow to get the snowblower out. And if you guys have any tips and tricks on how you get your machine ready for a snowstorm, let me know in the comments. I read every comment and I try to reply to all of them. So yeah, please leave your comments below if you have any tips or tricks. I love reading them, you guys. It's awesome.